Hello. So, professionally, you might refer to this as a little bit of an unscripted part two to my Accessibilizing a Job series. And today I wanted to talk about the interview process. So, if you missed part one, I would go back and check that out. I talked a little bit about travel, and something I kind of wanted to add on to that is that before I can even research whether or not I want to interview, I have to do all the travel stuff. So that's part one of my human filtering for a job, right? Is, can I get there? Can I get myself where I need to go when I need to be there? And can I do that independently? And so that's part one. And the interview process itself, I would break down into two individual parts. That's the preparation for the interview. Some of that is cumulative, and some of that is for each interview specifically, and I'll get to those points in a minute. And the second part is the actual execution of the interview. Now, preparation is a big one, and that's where we're going to start. Now, the first question that some people might ask is, okay, you're blind, do you disclose that? Do you tell people that you're blind before the interview, during the interview, after the interview? How do you go about it? And I'm going to tell you about my personal situation, what I tend to do. This is not what all blind people do. This is what I do given my situation, okay? And the short answer is that it's out there for the world to see, and I hope for the best. And the best is not always what I get, and I'll get to that in a moment. But for me, what's important is the skills I bring to the table. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the experiences I had trying to get the job that I have just started in a couple of weeks ago, that being with the Boys and Girls Club. So I would say the process of me starting to get this job actually starts almost 2 years ago. I had applied quite frequently to many different schools here locally, public schools primarily. I wanted to get in with elementary school. Kindergarten through second grade is kind of what I was targeting. And I put together a really good package of information. So within the materials I sent out, I had letters of recommendation from some summer camps and activities that I had worked. I had some materials from the YMCA, which was my first actual childcare job once I moved to Minnesota. I had a cover letter that talked about my different sets of skills, mentioned my visual impairment, but talked about a lot of what skills do I bring to this job specifically. And so I felt like that was a really adequate summary of who I was. And I sent all of this off every time I would apply. I sent this whole big old packet electronically to every job I applied to. And I probably had 4 or 5 interviews over the course of a couple years of applying off and on, for 2, 3, 4 months at a time. And I would just get nothing. I think twice I was actually contacted afterwards and told no, in which case I always tried to follow up to ask, what I could do better. And I was always told, oh no, your information looked great, we'll keep you on file. And I was like, well, that's not true, because if I looked great, you would have hired me. If there was something that I could have done better, I want to know what that is. And so that led me to start thinking that there was some form of discrimination going on, because it wasn't just here or there. I would either hear nothing from place after place after place, and then see newspaper articles about how desperate these places were to hire. And so it was obvious that they hadn't hired me, but they hadn't filled the position. And as this continued to happen more and more, I just started really getting extremely frustrated with the process, because I felt like I had the set of skills. I feel like I bring a lot to the table professionally when it comes to working with kids. I'm someone who, I connect well with kids. I am able to reshape ideas in ways that kids tend to really gravitate towards. I like to play with them. I like to emotionally connect with the kids I work with. And those are really important skills when you're talking about working with young children. And so again, all this information was things that I would give out every time I interviewed. My visual impairment was literally just in there. And I would say, as someone who, for example, in my cover letter, I talked about as someone who, went through school with a disability, I can understand some of the struggles that kids are facing. And I might be able to actually provide some insight as to what a problem might be. If you're seeing it as a behavior, it might not be a behavior problem. It might be that there's something else going on that we're not aware of. And I'm not an expert, but I might have an idea of what's going on. And lots of other things, and I'll get to that. But again, in terms of prep, right, I am putting together this big packet that's getting sent out every time, and I'm getting nothing back. So then it's like, okay, if the problem was the preparation, maybe I'm putting too much information, but I'm not doing well in the interviews. That's where the second part of this comes in, which is the execution of the interview itself. So we talked about travel. It's important for me to get there very early. I'm usually about half an hour early or so for the interview to make sure that I have used my public transit, gotten the right ride share, found the right door, gotten into the building in the right way, because sometimes people are pretty terrible at giving me directions as to like, hey, go find door number 8. Oh, wait, you didn't tell me that. So I walked in door number 1, 4, 7, and 9, and they were all locked. Finally found an obscure door number 8, wandered the hallways for 10 minutes because no one told me where to go, So again, I like to be really early, and I like to know that I'm at where I'm supposed to be at. From there, I'm a very good interviewer in the sense of being able to conversate, ask questions. I've usually done enough research on the place I'm trying to work that I actually come in with a couple questions for the interviewer, and just about their school, what their day looks like, the routine, and some of those types of things. And then making it really clear during the interview what some of my challenges and needs may be. So for example, one of the things I bring up in every interview is physical orientation to the space in which I will be working is extremely important to me. So I'll often ask, let's say I'm interviewing and I, hypothetically would get offered a position and start in a month. I would say, sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if I'm offered a position, could I set up a time to meet with someone, take a physical tour of the building so that I can become at least ballpark familiar with my space before I start my job? Because that's something that, I struggle with my specific visual impairment, and it's something that's really important to me. Another thing I might ask about is, what is your communication structure with staff? Do you use an app? If so, what app is it? Can I learn that app a little bit before I get started? What other sorts of day-to-day activities are conducted using technology? And what sort of technology is it? Because if it's not something I actually have skills in myself, I might be able to actually use some time before that interview, or after the interview, but before I start in a position to start familiarizing myself with some of the things that I'm going to need for a process that might take me 3 to 4 times longer than it might take someone with full vision. So I know this is rambly, but again, we break this down into 2 things. The prep for the interview, making sure that I'm sending all the information I want in the way that I want to convey it. And I'm very upfront about my disability. And then when I show up to an interview, making sure that I'm at the right space. I use a white cane, so I have got that with me. And I show up early, and I'm a good interviewer. And for 2 years, over, like I said, about maybe 4 to half a dozen interviews, all of that got me nothing. And to say that was frustrating it doesn't cover it. The first few times I honestly was like, well, it was kind of on the tail end of COVID. I hadn't had a lot of experience in the field at that point. So there was plausible reasons that I might have been, maybe made it a little farther in the process, but then ultimately someone else was chosen for a position. As time went on though, and it was obvious to me that these positions I was applying to were not actually being filled, it really started to get to me because I felt like I was giving 115% effort. I was doing absolutely everything within my power as a disabled person to speak up for myself, to advocate for myself, to be upfront and honest about what my challenges were and how I, as someone who has lived with this condition for almost 26 years at this point, I have experience in solving my own problems. And if I don't have solutions, I have ideas. And when I'm in an environment that is conducive to these conditions, I feel like I have a great work ethic, a great personality, and I can do well. You've just got to give me the chance. So with Boys and Girls Club, it's funny to me that this is the job that ended up working out, because I had been throwing a lot of applications out to some different schools, some private schools, some smaller schools, some even some religious schools. And I'm not a religious person, but I didn't know where else to turn. And when I got the information from, I believe it was an email from Boys and Girls Club saying that they wanted to do an interview, I was like, okay, like I'll try it. Not really the job I was going for, but I'll go. And the story of this is exactly why I do these things. So I called in sick to the job I had at the time, and got, up early and got ready to go to this interview. Didn't know where the building was because they had said they were going to send me information, and that hadn't happened yet. And I, of course, this is the morning of. They told me 1 o'clock, so I was up by 8, 9 o'clock, ready to go. Still didn't have any information. And what happened was that I just didn't see anything. And I was getting so frustrated, because at that point I hadn't heard back from a lot of other jobs I had applied to. And I was like, if they're not even going to get my information, like, I can't track these jobs down on top of doing all of this other work every time I apply for a job and getting nothing in return. Like, I can't keep doing this. And I had to step back and just take a deep breath. And I called. I said, I called in sick for work. I didn't tell this to the Boys and Girls Club, but to myself, I said, I called in sick for work for this, and I just need to step back, realize that someone may have just made a mistake, and I need to go do this interview, because I've put all my eggs in this basket at this point. I've got to go do something about that. And so I did. I called, and turns out someone had, misspelled my email or something like that, and they sent me the information. I got the address, and my girlfriend was kind enough to drive me to the interview and make sure that I got in the building. And during the interview, they asked about the job description and some of my previous experience with kids, all of which I was very ready to answer because I had done my prep work. And, when they asked about if I had any questions, I talked about the physical orientation, which they said didn't seem like it would be much of an issue. They asked, I was offered the job on the spot. And to me, it was just like cementing that these things are important, and that it is a skill set. And I needed to find a place that was willing to take a chance on me in the same way that I have taken a chance on so many places that have let me down. I wanted a place that was going to take that chance on me for their benefit, not for my loss, if that makes sense. And when I was out for the job, I jumped at it and I said, absolutely. And I went in for training. We had a week's worth of training, and I was able to get a little bit physically acclimated with the space that I'm working in. And, now I've been there for about 3 weeks with kids, and feel like I have a good handle on the space. And as issues are coming up, I have a very good back and forth with our administrative staff about, hey, I'm working on getting some materials in Braille. Do we have funding available, or can we look at how to get funding? And they are doing some looking into that. I'm working with the state services here in Minnesota to try to get some materials adapted into Braille so that I have what I need. All of this to say that it's really, really important when you accessibilize for an interview that you know yourself. And I feel like that's something that doesn't get talked enough when you talk about how to accessibilize things. And that's a term that I'm happy to talk about in another video, but basically it's just how to make your own system. And for me, this is what's worked. I spend a lot of time preparing my materials. I have my letters of rec who come from people who have seen me as a disabled person working in fields like summer camps, in a school setting, at the YMCA for childcare. And I have, my own cover letter that talks about my own experiences, strengths, and weaknesses. And I feel like I put together a really solid packet of information that goes out each time I apply. And then for the prep work, just do what you need to do. For me, that takes the form of making sure that I'm there on time, making sure that I can use, methods of public transit, or in this case, I can walk to my job. And making sure that all of that is as comfortable as you can so that when you walk into that interview, none of that is out of place. None of that throws a wrench into the situation. And that way I can focus all my attention on the interview itself which I've prepped for. And sometimes you do all of that, you do all of those things to the best of your ability, and it's still not enough. And that hurts. I've never been one to struggle with mental health, but I was questioning my own competence. Like, am I doing enough? What am I not doing that these places are not hiring me over and over and over again? And it turns out what I needed to find was a place that was willing to take a chance on me, because at the end of the day, it has to be a two-way street, and that's something I'm going to talk about down the road when I talk about like getting into a job and the support of a company and those types of things. But for the interview process, it's not about them yet. It's about knowing if it's a good fit and how does it feel to talk to somebody, and that's part of it. And I'm going to get to that again in another video down the track here. But in the interview process, I think you have to take a lot of it on yourself, and it's hard. It's really hard, and it takes practice. It takes failing. It takes hours and hours of research and preparation. But if you do all of that, and at the end of, when I walk out of every interview I've done over the last 3 years since I've moved to Minnesota, I've been able to say, like, very definitively, I think I did absolutely everything I could do. There's nothing, I'm leaving it all on the table, so to speak. And being able to walk out of an interview as a person with a disability and say, you know what, I did absolutely everything I can do, excuse me, and I think I did it the best I could, that is a place to start. And from there, there's much more to talk about in terms of accessibilizing a job, all of which I will do in another video. This was a rambly one. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for checking this out. I'm curious to know what your thoughts, opinions are on a matter like this. And I'm going to talk more about onboarding, the support of a company itself, and what that means, how to go about navigating some tough situations, and more as we continue talking about accessibilizing a job. So thank you for watching this one, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.